All right. Hello, everyone. We're going to get started here. Welcome to today's webinar, and thanks for joining us. Today, we're going to be talking about how to develop effective EHS training, and we'll get into exactly what that means here in a minute. We'll be going about 25 minutes today, and we'll leave 5 minutes or so at the end for questions. So if you have any questions during the presentation, just go ahead and put them into the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. This webinar is brought to you today by Convergence Training. We're Convergence Training. If you're unfamiliar with us, we develop custom and off-the-shelf safety and compliance training, and we also developed a learning management system to help deliver and manage workforce training programs. So if you're interested in learning more about us, you can visit our website, convergencetraining.com, or you can reach out to us after the webinar. So again, this is a webinar about developing effective EHS training. I'm JP Dahl, the marketing manager here at Convergence Training, and today I'm joined by our very own Jeff Dalto, Senior Learning and Development Specialist here at Convergence Training, where he has also served as a writer, content developer, and customer trainer. And Jeff has over 20 years of instructional design experience, and he's going to be leading us through our webinar here today. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff.
All right, thank you very much. Thanks to JP, and more importantly, thanks to everybody out there for taking a little time to come into this webinar. We're going to discuss developing effective EHS training, and so let's just start into it. To do that, we're going to lean on a document called ANSI Z490.1, kind of as some source of information. Maybe some of you know who ANSI is and what Z490.1 is, but maybe others of you don't. Let's cover that real quickly. ANSI is the American National Standards Association. Z490.1 is one of their standards, and it deals with accepted practices in EHS training. The standard itself was created by ANSI and the American Society of Safety Engineers, so plenty credible. And for those of you who are just totally unfamiliar with the idea of standards, so you can think of them as guidelines. In all cases, they're best practices. Sometimes they have legal or regulatory consequences. In the case of Z490.1, ANSI just published a brand new version in 2016. So if I recall, like a month ago, this is hot off the press, if you will, and encourage you to check it out, become familiar with it. Here's what ANSI covers, and it's a lot. I can't remember how large the pamphlet is, maybe 30 or 40 pages, but you see there's a number of sections and a number of annexes. We're not going to deal with all of this today. We're going to deal with a focused part of it, but we do encourage you to go to the ANSI website and buy this standard. It's very useful and beneficial. We also have, at the Convergence Training blog, we have an article about each one of these sections, and we have a free downloadable guide on EHS training that's based on this information. And each of you who are attending this webinar will get that guide a day or two from now in an email as well. So what we're going to focus on today is some parts of section 4, which is about EHS training development. And here's what section 4 deals with, and even that is quite a bit of information. So again, we're not going to deal with all of that. We do have articles to help you go through all of it. We hope you buy the standard, of course. But we're just going to deal with 4 aspects: learning objectives, course design, course development, and an evaluation strategy. So with that intro, let's get into it and look at the first of those 4 aspects, learning objective. Again, this might be something you're familiar with, and others maybe you don't know what it is. But a learning objective, pretty simply, is what you want your employees to be able to do when the training is done. So it's the reason you held the training, and it's what you want them to do when training is done. So you want them to use this new information, this new knowledge, this new skill on the job. In terms of safety, here's some rough examples. Explain the elements of a GHS-aligned chemical label. Safely perform a machine changeover, or perform all steps of safely entering a permit-required confined space. So we're going to, these are rough examples. We're going to polish them up during this webinar. But you see how these are common safety training needs? You can see how, yeah, I might have a safety training session on a topic like that, or that exact topic. And you can see how you would want people to be able to learn these things. So yeah, I want them to come out of training and know how to perform a machine changeover in a safe manner. Or I want them to go out into the job and be able to explain the elements of a GHS-aligned chemical label. So you could probably think of examples of your own as well. So what makes a good objective? Objectives, there are multiple things can, but there's a couple of simple tests that we're going to tell you about right now. The first is known for shorthand as ABCD, and the second shorthand is known as SMART. So let's look at each of those. First, ABCD, and what this means is that when you're writing your objective, you should think of it as having 4 parts. Maybe you won't display all 4 parts to your learners every time, but at least consider the need when you're writing them and creating them. So what are those 4 parts? A stands for the actor. These are employees who have to perform an action after training's over, like identify GHS label elements. B is the behavior. This is the behavior that your actors have to perform. What should employees be able to do after training? C is condition. Under what conditions should the behavior be performed? Now this is one of those where maybe it'll apply sometimes and maybe it won't in others, but you should always ask yourself, do they have to do the behavior under certain conditions? And then D, degree. How well or to what degree must the behavior be performed? Again, maybe there's no degree, but again, ask yourself while you're creating the objective if it's relevant. So let's look at a sample learning objective here. The employee must correctly identify and explain the elements of a GHS-aligned chemical label on various chemical containers with no failures. What's the A for actor? The employee. So remember, and this is a kind of a common error when people are writing learning objectives. So you're writing for the employee, not to remind you what to talk about. So here's our actor, the employee. The behavior, correctly identify and explain the elements of a GHS-aligned chemical label. All right, they're doing something. And notice they're verbs, identify and explain. Your behaviors are always going to be verbs. On various chemical containers, these are conditions. And with no failures. So this is the degree to which I have to do this. So here we have a nice, simple 4-part ABC learning objective. Now, with that example and that information in mind, what we're going to do here, and in just a moment I'm going to start up a little poll. You will see a learning objective on screen. I'll read it as well. And I think you'll have 2 options. Yeah, this has 4 parts, or it doesn't, A, B, C, D, or no. So bear with me while I use this software, select a poll question. And yeah, okay. I believe you should now see that on screen. And if we're not seeing that on screen, go ahead and let me know. Otherwise, you see the learning objective. It is employee must identify the location of emergency exits, missing none, within 10 seconds. Go ahead and answer the poll. Let me know if you think we've got 4 elements there or if we don't. Okay. And sorry if we weren't seeing the poll before. We should be seeing it now. Little problem getting used to the software. Votes are rolling in. My apologies once again. We are trying to determine if this is a 4-part ABCD learning objective. And we got about half the voters in already. And there's a heavy element of yes, there are 4 parts here. But about almost 10% are saying no, there are not 4 parts. So let's look at what we got here. Employee, there's our actor. Identify the location of emergency exit. There's our behavior. Missing none, that's our degree. And within 10 seconds, that's our condition. So I would say, yeah, this is a nice 4-part learning objective. We had about a 90 to 10% break on that one. So I'm going to go ahead and close this poll, go back to our presentation, and move on to the next of our 2 tests about learning objectives. Okay, if the first was A, B, C, D, the next is SMART. Each of those letters in SMART stands for a characteristic of an objective. S means it's specific. Is it phrased clearly so everyone knows what it means? M, measurable. Is it possible to objectively determine if the employee met the objective? So this is not something that's reliant upon your own mysterious understanding of what it means to have met the objective. Either I did or I didn't, I did one or I didn't do one, I identified it or I didn't identify it. Achievable, is it something that, fair to expect your employees to be able to do? Is it realistic? Is it relevant? Is it something they're going to do on the job? And is it either timely or in some cases time-based? It should always be timely. By this we mean, is it something I'm going to use on the job soon? So for example, if I'm going to go out and work with chemical labels soon, yeah, training on chemical labels is timely. In some cases, as we saw earlier, there might be a time-based as well. Do it within 10 minutes, for example. Let's look back at our sample learning objective here. The employee about correctly identifying and explaining elements of a GHS-aligned chemical label. So I'll go through this one, and then you guys will have another little poll question. I think this is specific. Again, you can always quibble with things, but seems pretty specific. It's measurable. People are either going to identify and explain elements or they're not. It's not vague and nebulous. It's achievable. This is totally possible for your employees to do. It's a realistic thing to ask them. Now, is it relevant? Well, that depends on my employee, but assuming they're going to be working with dangerous chemicals and assuming those chemicals will have GHS-aligned chemical labels, it's 100% relevant. And then D, is it timely or time-based? In this case, we're talking about timely. And again, it's timely if I'm going to go out into the field and work with GHS labels today or this week. It's not timely if I'm not going to work with GHS labels until a year from now. So that depends on the circumstance. So let's go again to another poll. Hopefully I'll get this a little more smooth this time. I'm going to put an objective on the screen, and you're going to tell me if you think it has the 5 elements, SMART. So let me do that. And here's the mystery launch button. And I think we might see a little bit more diversity of opinion here, but go ahead and say yes or no. Okay, votes are rolling in, and what I was hoping would happen is happening. The heavy lean here is that this is not a SMART learning objective. Some people think it's SMART, but here's my problem. So I agree with those of you saying, no, this is not SMART. And my problem with this objective, the employee must understand the PSM regulation. Particularly, it's not measurable, and the word understand. What does it mean if your employee understands it? How does the employee prove they understand it? How do I determine if they've understood it? Understand is one of these nebulous kind of soft words instead of something like state or demonstrate, or it's not a measurable action. All right, so good. Thanks everybody for participating in that poll. We'll do this one more time a little bit later. Let's get back to our presentation. We're now done talking about learning objectives, and we're going to talk about course design and specifically about the selection of training delivery methods. So what does that mean, selection of training delivery methods? Well, first of all, there are many different kinds of training delivery methods, and these include things like instructor-led classroom, field-based training, mentoring, shadowing, or following, e-learning or online, written training materials, videos, and even this webinar that we're doing. And what Z490.1 suggests, as do I, and most learning experts, is that you use what's called a blended learning solution. So what is a blended learning solution? That means you're using different types of training delivery for different needs and kind of mixing and matching those training delivery methods. The next question is, okay, great, I can blend my training delivery methods, but how do I know which training delivery method to use for each specific training need? And what Z490.1 suggests is that you pick the training delivery method based on the need for feedback for that particular training need. And in particular, they say you should select a delivery method that allows for adequate feedback. So that's kind of their test for this. And we have a similar idea here at Convergence Training, and we represent it kind of simplistically in a 3-level training pyramid, where some training needs, as we'll show you at the bottom of this pyramid, require very little feedback. And as a result, you can handle those training needs with a certain kind of training. And then as you progress up the training pyramid, you have more need for feedback and more need for either intensive one-on-one feedback or feedback over a continued period of time, a longer period of time. And therefore, you might use different training methods at each of these levels. Now, it's not a firm rule. You'll do some mixing and matching, but it gives you a nice idea on how to base your blend. So let's look at that bottom level, the basic knowledge. This is like basic 100 level information I might need to know about safety. An example is, what are the label elements on a GHS label? And this is the kind of stuff, it doesn't require a lot of feedback. I'm telling you information. And so you can use things like written training materials, simple videos, maybe that you produced yourself, simple linear e-learning courses, webinars like we're doing now. And for the most part, there's not a ton of need for feedback here. If you need to, you can later arrange a little Q&A session. But your workers can often do this on their own with limited feedback, and that's when you'd use those kind of more simple training delivery methods. Now, one step up the pyramid, we have some simple procedures, some basic skills. And my example here is maybe the process for a safe machine changeover, assuming it's a small machine. And here, like maybe you're going to need a little bit of feedback, not a ton, not intensive, not going over weeks and months. But so maybe you'll do a classroom or group training where you present this information and then people can do it themselves in the field and so on. But it's not a ton of feedback, and so you'll use different kinds of training for this. And then finally, you have these advanced job skills that require a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience, a lot of skills. And as a result, you have more need for intensive feedback, for feedback over a longer period of time. It's going to be spontaneous, unpredictable. My example here is maybe teaching everybody they need to know about entering a permit-required confined space, or maybe even designing the PSM program at your workplace or something like that. And here you're going to need more of that one-to-one, person-to-person training. Maybe you'll follow that up with OJT mentoring and shadowing, so someone can learn over an extended period of time on the job. You might have some classroom training again. You could do real-world simulations where people can practice in kind of a fake scenario so they can do that task without having real-world negative consequences on the job. And you could do similar things with e-learning courses where you set up a simulation and have a scenario-based learning. So those are our tips for you about one way to think about creating a blended learning program where you're selecting the training delivery method based on the need for adequate feedback. And now we're going to go back to a poll. I'm going to give you 3 different training needs. And you're going to say if the training need calls for very little feedback, more feedback, or a whole bunch of feedback. And I think you'll see this is more subjective. There's no right answer for any of these. But let's move on to our first question here. I'm launching it now. You should see it on the screen. And our question here is about how to run the PSM program at your site. And your job is to tell me if this requires little feedback, more feedback, or a whole bunch of feedback. All right, votes are rolling in. What I've noticed and what I anticipated is nobody said very little feedback, and I agree with that. The answer is leaning towards, we have 65% of people saying a lot of feedback. That's what I anticipated. Others of you said 37% only moderate. So again, wherever you think that fits in, and of course, it depends on the PSM program at your work site. But so here I would probably say like, oh, this might require a lot of one-to-one, person-to-person training, or it might require an extended OJT mentoring shadowing program, and maybe some of these other things we talked about, classroom training, real-world simulations, e-learning, and so on. All right, I'm going to close this particular poll and immediately open a second one. And here we go, launching this one. We have a new training need, which is about how to lock out a machine. Again, same test for you, 3 different answers. Very little feedback, a moderate amount, or a lot. And I'll tell you, I thought this was the hardest one to come up with a single answer. And we're getting a wider diversity of opinion here as a result. Votes are rolling in. 6% of you say very little. So maybe it's a super duper simple machine. 53% of you say moderate, which is what I anticipated. And then 41% of you say a lot. And I thought we might hear some of those as well. And ultimately, I think that depends on the machine and the lockout procedure as well. So if it's a simple small machine with one lockout point, very little or moderate. If it's a super complicated, we work with paper manufacturers a lot with many, many lockout points. So it would be a lot more feedback, presumably. Okay, one more time. I close that poll. I'm going to go to open a last poll. All right, and here this is explaining your policy that there's no smoking indoors, and people are going to vote. And this is just what I anticipated. Votes are rolling in, and almost everybody's saying very little feedback. A small number of people are saying a moderate feedback, which surprises me, but I'm I'm going to guess that has to do with the addictive nature of tobacco and the fact that people are going to complain about the program more so that they don't understand it. So that would be interesting to know. All right, but everyone did very well. You get this idea of how to select training delivery methods based on the need for feedback. I'm going to close poll. I'm going to go back to our presentation. And we're going to go to our third element we want to talk about today, which is how to develop your training content. And here there are two aspects to this answer. The first is the information that you're presenting. And the second is how do you present that information in a way that makes it easier to learn and more likely that people will remember and change their behavior later. So let's look at those. First is the information. You want to make sure you're getting information from credible, reputable sources. What do I mean? Scientific journals, accepted scientific laws, safety organizations, National Safety Council, AIHA, the ASSE. I think we got 2 people from Puget Sound ASSE chapter out there. Hello to you guys if you're there. Regulatory agencies, OSHA, MSHA, EPA. So get your information from credible, reputable, reliable sources. Don't just pick up a rumor from Facebook. And then next, once you have that information, you want to present it in a way that improves the learner experience. And we're showing a couple ideas here on screen. I'm going to go over these a little bit more. One tip for you, if you're looking for one book that will tell you how to do this well, I could not come up with a better suggestion than Julie Dirkson's book, Designed for How People Learn, which it's a classic, it's easy, it's short, and she just came out with the 2nd volume. So keep your eyes out for that. We have a review of it on our blog. But let's look through these 5 tips we got for you. First, match your training content to that learning objective. So remember, you created an objective, and that's what you wanted people to be able to do when training's over. So your content should match that. So here's our earlier objective about identifying and explaining elements of a GHS-aligned chemical label. And what you want to do is create training that explains and identifies and explains those elements. So make sure that's included, and then don't include other stuff that's irrelevant, that's in addition, bonus training. Avoid your bonus training impulse, even if you think it's interesting or fascinating. Next, you're going to be teaching adults in almost all cases. I understand some of you might be working with teenagers, especially as summer comes up, but in almost all cases, you're working with adults. And adults have a set of characteristics that are in common that make them more likely to learn in some scenarios and less likely in other scenarios. Those are known as adult learning principles. You will see those principles written up differently. We have a different version on our blog that I'm about to show you, but these are the what ANSI called out, so we want to show you those. First, treat your trainees with respect. Recognize and respond to different learning styles. Exercise professional judgment in difficult situations. Show flexibility in both tone and pace during training. Coach and counsel the trainees to help them learn. Value the experience levels that they bring to training and be aware of it and then value it and make use of it. And then I think most importantly, or one of the most important, encourage active participation. And that's covered very well in Dirkson's book, by the way. But so if you're creating training that respects these adult learning principles, you're going to get better results at the end. If you ignore these principles, you're going to get poor results. Garbage in, garbage out, if you will. Okay, another tip, keep it short. We're doing our best to keep it short here. Hopefully I'm not going over. There's a limited amount of information that people can learn at any one time. So here's some safety examples. If you're doing safety training, don't cover an entire OSHA regulation, which would lead to a mind-numb audience. Instead, explain what that worker needs to know for his or her job. Cut out that additional information if it's not necessary, if it's just there because you think it's interesting. You can cover that during lunch. And then, limit time. 15 minutes is not a bad idea, 15, 20 minutes. Don't go on for hours and hours. And then finally, speak their language. And I mean this in 2 ways. First, literally, of course. I know a lot of you may work with workforces that speak multiple languages. So make sure if you're delivering training that you're delivering it in a form that the worker can understand. And then secondly, I'm meaning this metaphorically as well. And what I mean is use conversational language. For whatever reason, a lot of times people fall into super formal talk during training, even if they're writing it. They use a lot of academic terms, a lot of jargon, a lot of acronyms, and they don't explain their acronyms. Here's an example. It is imperative to all individuals involved that the equipment be stopped and remain still while the work is being performed. That's a big mouthful. I personally never use the word imperative while chitty-chatting with friends. Maybe you can rewrite this to something like, for everyone's safety, when maintenance is done on a machine, the machine must be stopped and remain still the entire time. It's conversational, it's more approachable, it's more accessible. It's not hard to do this. Here's another tip for you, by the way. You can go to a website called the Hemingway app and copy your text in, and it'll help you get a simpler version. I think it's a great website. So here's an example of speaking their language. Okay, the fourth of our 4 elements is evaluating the training. And what we're talking about here is evaluating your training to see if it was effective. Again, that's your goal, is to have effective EHS training. And the common way in learning and development to talk about this is something called the Kirkpatrick model. We have an article about it on our blog. But it's evaluating at 4 levels. And I'm going to teach you each of those 4 levels right now. First is a reaction survey. And you're probably familiar with this. This is a survey delivered to employees immediately after training. And what you should do is you should focus your questions on whether or not the training prepared the workers for their job, if they felt they learned, if they're ready to do their job, and stuff about what the training or trainer did well or could do better. And a kind of common area, but things you should avoid are questions about like, did you like the training? Or vague questions. I'll give you an example of that in just a moment. So first, some bad examples. How much did you like this training? Rate on a score of 1 to 5. Now this is super common, but there are 2 problems with this. First of all, did you like this training? This has nothing to do with whether or not I learned or whether or not I'm prepared to work safely on the job. The second problem with like is studies show that there's almost no correspondence between people who said they liked training and people who actually learned. So it's largely meaningless information. The second problem here is that this ratings, rate on a score of 1 to 5. It's very vague what a 1 is, what a 3 is, what a 5 is. How is a 4 different than a 3? That's true for your trainees. Like, I don't know, what's a 3, what's a 4? It's also true for you when you're calculating the data. Like, you found out you have an average score of 3.7. I mean, is that good? Is that bad? And what do you do with a 3.7? It's not clear. There's no action item there. The second thing is, here's another bad question. True or false? This training prepared me well to work safely in the field. That sounds kind of good. We talk about working safely in the field, but you're kind of leading them to say, true, yeah, that was great training and I'm well prepared, thank you very much. So try to avoid that kind of leading question as well. Let's look at maybe a better example. And I drew this from a guy named Will Thalheimer. We'll get back to that in a second. How prepared are you to apply at work what you just learned during training? So this is a good question. You learned something during training and I want to know if you're prepared to apply it at work. That's our goal. And here's some answer options. Not at all. I have some awareness of the concepts taught, but I will need more training to do this job on the job. I can do it on a job, but I need more training to be fully competent. I am fully competent. So I understand that. As an employee, that would help me match to my real world experience. And as a trainer, if I'm looking over these answers later, I get this as well. If everyone's fully competent, I did my job perfectly. If everyone's not at all, I've got some work to do. And if I'm somewhere in those middle zones, at least I know what the problem is. So this is a good reaction survey question. And again, I mentioned earlier, I borrowed all these examples from a guy named Dr. Will Thalheimer. He's an expert on this, and he's got a book on Amazon. I recommend you check it out, all about writing these survey questions. So hat tip to Dr. Will Thalheimer. The second part of training evaluation is a post-training assessment. We're talking about basically a test or some kind of skill demonstration. So again, tests or some kind of field-based skill demonstration or performance assessment. Those tests can take many forms. It might be written, it might be oral, might be something they're doing online, like we're seeing here. Here's a little quiz about identifying GHS labels and pictograms and the like. Or again, out in the field. And when you're doing this, you want to see someone performing a skill and you have an evaluator watching that person. And typically you'll have some form of checklist or rating scale or rubric that the evaluator is using to evaluate that person and write down the information, and later you calculate that. Kind of cool thing about that is now there are a lot of digital tools out there to help you take your checklist in the field and check people off and write notes. Third level of training evaluation, are they doing it on the job after training? So you're going to go out in the field after training has happened and see if they're actually applying that. Again, that was your goal. When you're out there in the field and you see people doing it, you might require you to give them some on-the-spot encouragement and recognition. John, I see you're doing this. Well done. Thank you. Maybe they're not doing it, in which case they might need some coaching, some refresher training, again, right on the spot. If people are not taking the training and applying it on job when you go out to watch, that's going to call for you to do some investigating and find out why. Maybe it's because your training was bad, in which case, revise the training and do it again. Make it better. And safety is like everything else. It's a process of continuous improvement. But it may be that the training was perfect. Everyone gets it. Everyone knows how to do it. And there's something else going on. Maybe there's a manager who, right after training's over, is saying, ignore all that, and I just want you to work faster and harder. So find out what's going on. And sometimes it's the training and sometimes it's not. All right. The last level is it having a positive effect or a negative effect on your business goal, but a desired positive effect, presumably. So is your training leading on-job behaviors that have a positive effect on business goal? A simple example is the number of safety incidents at your site over a quarter or a year or so on. And that's the 4 levels of the Kirkpatrick model for evaluating training. And that means we're now done with the 4 things we want to talk about. To remind you what we talked about, first was what is a learning objective and 2 tests, A, B, C, D, and SMART. Second is there are different training delivery methods. It's a good idea to blend them, and you're going to pick your delivery method based on the need for adequate feedback. Third was how to create effective training, and the idea was to use credible information and then present it in a manner that makes it easier for your employees to learn. And then last is how to evaluate your training to see if it was effective. We talked about 4 levels for doing that. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my coworker, JP, and we're going to take any questions that we have out there. JP, are you out there?
Yeah, I am. We do have a couple questions, and I apologize, we went a little bit long, so I think what we'll do is if you have anybody else has any questions that they haven't asked yet, if you want to put it in as we're wrapping up into the chat, we can follow up with you all offline after the webinar.
Oh, I'm sorry, does that mean we'll do all questions offline?
Yeah, we'll do all the questions offline, so if you want to just kind of wrap up here.
I'll do that. So apologies from me for going long. I apologize for that. And we'll get you back to your questions, everybody. Hopefully you got some use out of that. All right, so what's next? There's a quick survey about this webinar. If you take a minute or two, we'd really get some useful information that we can apply in later webinars. So please, as soon as I'm done, there'll be a survey. As JP mentioned earlier, there's a recording of this webinar. You'll get that in an email from us from a day or two. That email or a similar email will include other links to information about Z490.1 and effective EHS training in general. And you'll also get our free downloadable guide to effective EHS training, what we talked about as well. So with that said, we're going to close down this webinar. Again, we're Convergence Training. Feel free to email us here. We'll get back to your questions offline. We thank you for your time. Hope you have a great day.